My name is Kristine Stiles. I'm a professor of art history, and visual studies here at Duke. And I'm very happy to see such a large crowd here today to talk about art in the digital age. You have on your seats the bios of all the artists before you. So I'm not going to go back over those bios since you can look at them as they speak and it seems excessive. And I'm also not going to have a long introduction because I think we should just get into discussion. I prepared questions for the participants, and I'm going to read out my questions and let whomever wishes to speak in a free way. And I copied the questions for the audience for you to have if you'd like to take them away after the panel. In a spirit of openness that we have been discussing all week, I thought you might like to have these questions. So you have the panelists lined up before you with their name tags in front of them, and we're just going to begin. So the first question that I have for the panelists, I've divided the questions into two parts. One are general questions related to artists and society in visual culture, and the second body of questions are related to a creation of new kinds of knowledges and collaboration with other fields. So we're going to start with the general questions and move more to the specific. So the first question I have for the panel is, the German artist Joseph Beuys famously insisted, quote, that everyone is an artist. This may come to be true through visual cultures, but in a way that he did not imagine. My question is, what is the role of an artist in cultures inundated with the visual, where many people have the technical tools and skills to produce hybrid, remix, artistic visuality? And I have follow-up questions. So any one of our panelists can just jump in. I prepared them with the questions before, so some people have been taking notes.
Well, I think I can start.
So we're going to begin with Anya Belkina.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. My name is Anya Belkina. I'm an artist who works in many genres, and now, as Lev Manovich put it, hybridizing them in the environment of new media. I think I would alter Beuys' statement. I would say that every artist has a potential. I mean, every person has a potential for being an artist, but not necessarily that everyone is an artist. I think, especially in our age of pervasive visuals, it is important for a person who thinks of himself or herself as an artist to be visually literate. And what it means to me is that that person can bring in congruency the intent or the content of the work with its formal manifestations. And what I see my students do, of course, they all think they're artists, right, in the design class or drawing class. And they have very little experience in handling abstract ideas visually. So when they're faced with a question of relating something abstract as love or tension, they're really stuck. They really don't know what to do, and they usually default to using whatever filters are available and whatever programs, which is really not very artistic at all. So I think that kind of interpretation of creativity that my students kind of have, the kind of rudimentary way of thinking about being an artist, is reinforced by the industry that puts out a lot of commercials about, or just buy Photoshop and you can be an artist, which of course is not entirely true. So I thought I'll just start with this provocative statement and let the rest of you play off it.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to respond to the sort of part of the question is, what is the role of an artist in a culture where so many people have access to tools that allow us to make images, and I would also add sounds and text to that also.
And concepts.
And concepts, right. So, I mean, I think our sort of job description is probably to make beauty, and by beauty I don't mean sort of, visual, the retinal beauty, but to make a sort of conceptual beauty by troubling the waters. So, to enhance things by making problems. I think that's our job.
I'm in music art, you know, so the sound aspect of it. But as an artist, I feel like the role of the artist versus the role of someone who has the ability to create art is that you want it to be pure. Like the motive for an artist is to create art. It's not to get paid. It's not to have something out there on YouTube for someone to see. It's to make the art and to bring it from your soul in order to give it to people to interpret. So I think it's the responsibility of the artist to maintain the purity and the lack of ulterior motive within your art. So, very simply.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if I can just build on this point and simplify it further, I think anything that sells anything is not art. So, yeah, it has to.
But artists sell all the time.
That's true, but it's not done. It's not done with the purpose of selling. It comes
I
from.
think it can be. I think it can be, right? I mean, and I think there are different kinds of art. I mean, you know, a lot of my students come into class making art. They may be making bad art, but they are making art, right? So I think there are levels of.
Keith, can you define bad art?
No, I can't. I know it when I see it.
Yes, bad art is like porn. You know what I mean? You see it?
Is that good or bad? Is that good or bad?
I don't know. I don't know if that's good or bad. You have to ask Keith.
Sometimes
Pure
bad porn is,
porn or non-pure porn?
sometimes bad porn is good art.
So, Goto, do you have anything you want to add?
To respond to the question directly, I think there are two things. One thing is, yes, certainly everyone wants to be artist, but the thing is, it's also two things. To be artist or to want to be artist is two different kind of things. Certainly there is no criteria that who is artist, who is not artist. No one can define. I think it's in a way, it's a really personal issue that no one can define to others. Certainly, each artist needs his own vocabulary. In order to say something, he has to assemble his own vocabulary, create syntax, and so on. So this is something that he has to build his own himself. So that I think it's really personal matter in this point.
I'd also like to say that I think when we say, in a lot of discussions when the idea that everyone is an artist comes up, I think the response that some artists have is about the privileges of being an artist or the privilege of being seen as an artist. That's one of the main questions about what it means to say everyone is an artist. But we might think about it differently. We thought that if we focus on the responsibilities of an artist, and we said everyone is an artist, then we might mean that everyone is responsible for the aesthetic choices they're making and how they work, or making choices that challenge other people with the aesthetic choices they make every day. I mean, if we think about it that way, then we say, well, what does it mean for everyone to consciously make spectacles or make challenging concepts? You know, I mean, I think that could really be an interesting and empowering way to think about everyone as an artist.
Rene, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think getting into the whole construction of hierarchies and who's an artist, who's not an artist, especially I think to me is absolutely, well, it's a little absurd. It's a little absurd because of the fact that people make art. There's outsider art, there's insider art, there's high art, there's museum art, there's gallery art, there's street art, there's performance art, there's, so art is art is art is art is art. There's good art, there's bad art, there's fine art, there's visual art, so once you start getting into who's an artist, who's not, I think we're already into constructing paradigms in which we're oppositional rather than relational. And I think that's, so I wouldn't even start there. That would be me.
Okay. Follow-up questions to this. Art once represented and incorporated idiosyncratic conditions and productions that were difficult to reproduce by automated means. What does it imply for the future of art that it can be increasingly digitized, automated, and so forth? And then a question related to that is, how does the artist negotiate this new relationship and the relationship to other artists making all the kinds of things that Rene just discussed, some of whom some people call amateurs?
I'll start that one. With music, there was a time when you had to go to a very expensive recording studio to create music. You did have to have someone who had been an expert at, manipulating 2-inch reels and, the 24-track recorders and the big boards and be able to unplug and everything. Now all you have to do is go online and find some free shareware to be a recording artist almost. And what it's done is it's leveled the playing field, and it's allowed people who don't have the financial means to create the art to do that. But what it's also done is that it's kind of just overrun the field with people who aren't really artists and don't really have the dedication to do it. They just have the ability to do it. And it's good and bad because I think, everybody knows the music industry is suffering, horribly with the creation of MP3s. It's leveled the playing field, but it's also really taken, the oomph away from being a larger artist or being someone that's been established because, you're going against people who have sometimes no scruples, sometimes no artistic value in what it is they're doing. They're just trying to create in order to make money, in order to just be out there, and they lose the point of making art. But in music, the technology has really, opened the door for a lot of people, and it's good and bad. As an artist that, has access to both, it's great to be able to record and do all these things at home with very little, I have technical experience, but with not as much technical experience as I may have needed 15, 20 years ago. But, the result is often a watered down field in, art. Music is definitely watered down from what it used to be. I can only speak for music. So.
Yeah. I would say the big change that's happened as sort of automated systems have become more prevalent is not so much exactly what's being produced from these automated systems, but the time for contemplation that goes into the process. So it's not just that 20 years ago it would take you a lot of time or a lot of money to get access to a recording studio, or a lot of time to produce a number of paintings, for instance, but as you saved up the money, or as you spent the time producing a certain body of work, you had a lot of time to think about what you were making. And so now we're able to generate many more sounds and many more images at a great pace, but we're not taking the time to reflect on those things that we're producing. And I think that's a significant change, more than what the things sound like or what they look like.
Yeah, I agree with that point, and I also want to add that the technical complexities, although some software are really easy to use, there are so many different pieces of software that often come into play in a single project that an artist now has to investigate, learn how to use. That a lot of our time as artists now is being spent in reading technical materials, whereas before we might be reading fiction or some other stimulating. You know what I mean? So yeah, I totally agree with you. The time for thinking and contemplation seems to be shrinking, both in terms of the pace at which we produce and exhibit the works, and the pace at which the audience at large is prepared and eager to consume it, and also our time is shrinking because of the technical issues involved.
I think that this notion of this notion that there was a time when the creation of art was a pure act. I think that technology has somehow altered the pure act of art making. I think is actually a little false. If we go back to the early 20th century, if you start to think about Sun Records, Johnny Cash's early records, what did he do? He went and he paid to record his sounds. He paid somebody to go in and record his sound. So if you think about, blues records, if you think about, guys traveling around picking up picking up music from people and just recording it. It was, it's always been facilitated by technology, and I think today, I personally love technology. I love technology. Because the reason, and I think that, okay, I love technology. I love the fact that that I can do so many things with so many with these are just new tools. These are just new tools. You know, these are just new tools. You know, at the same time that I'm working on my G5 laptop with, you know, with 2.4 gigahertz speed, I've got a pencil and a paper right next to me. Both technologies. So I think that to create, once again, these paradigms and these constructions where, you know, it's always oppositional, and we're always sort of thinking about it used to be, and now it is.
Well, I think the issue is not just what the artist intends because of whatever tools they're using, but what the marketplace demands because of the tools that are available to the artist, right? So if we talk about, you know, let's say the music industry, for one, you know, 15, 20 years ago, because artists had to sort of work in expensive recording studios, nobody expected an upcoming artist to deliver a finished product, right? But now, if you're an unsigned, unknown artist, you know, a record label won't listen to an artist unless they've delivered something that looks like a finished product, where an artist hasn't had the time to develop, to even produce anything that, you know, might have been considered a finished product 20 years ago. So that's a significant difference. So even if you want to work with pen and paper, the marketplace demands are slightly different. And so that's a factor more than what we might intend as artists.
Well, also, as McLuhan pointed out 40 or 50 years ago or 60 years ago, every technology changes the body and changes the environment. So the new technologies that we're working with have an impact. And I think that's really, it's not a question of old technologies versus new. It's like, what are the ramifications of the new technologies? I think Jay Bully was addressing that too. And I'm sure that you have that experience of a difference with different technologies.
We all love technology.
Oh
Right?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
We all,
Love it.
but you know, it's a love-hate relationship. Sometimes it's pure love, and sometimes it's duplication. You said, Rachel?
Yeah.
We love duplication.
Rachel, what do you mean by duplication?
I mean, what about the issue of taking content and using it and remixing it,
yeah.
or swiping your stuff and not giving you
Right.
credit? I mean, you haven't spoken to that at all. Is that
Yeah.
an issue for you or not? Because it's digital, it's now easy to do that.
Okay, I'll jump in here really quick and say that I've been reading a little book called Postproduction that talks about this idea, and that it's actually John Bourriand, I think is the guy's name. He's French, out of University of Tokyo in Paris, and he talks that it's not really remix, it's not mashup, it's post-production. That it's basically you're producing out of what's already been produced. And so it's this really interesting concept. I think that I bite all the time. Last night in my performance, all I did was bite from all kinds of sources. I keep logs of where I bite it from, the time codes and stuff. So when I get a lawsuit, I know where to I know where to find it and how much I owe them. But you know, the thing is that, you know, it's not an easy answer. It's not like I can say that it's right or wrong, that it's bad or good, because of the fact that you have marketeers walking the streets of New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and saying, I love those pants. I'm going to make those pants, and I'm going to make 50,000 of those, and I'm going to get them produced in China, and then I'm going to sell them for $150 in a boutique. You've got kids, then you've got kids being paid lots of money to listen to other kids, and then go back to these marketeers and tell them what to say in commercials that get sold to Volkswagen Jetta commercials. So I think that it's a two-way street, and I think that that this idea of remix and this idea of biting goes both ways. One of your colleagues, one of your compatriots, he has a Electroplankton Man. It's a video game, Nintendo DS. It's this beautiful game that allows you to make music just on this little game, and you make music, and it's like all of a sudden you think of yourself as a musician, and I love that. I love it. So.
Somebody in the back.
Yeah, I would say, I just want to respond to the question about duplication. I mean, I think it's easier now, obviously. I mean, that's sort of what many of these digital tools were designed to do, make duplication easier. But I guess in the tradition that we see ourselves working out of, working out of the sort of African-American creative tradition, you know, versioning is older than digital tools, right? So while we kind of make a lot of internet-based projects, and a lot of our things are, you know, based in code to some degree, we be doing remixes anyway, right? Because it's just what we do, right? So so a lot of our projects are remixes of stories. Our music doesn't always have sort of concrete samples, but they have conceptual samples, and so the tools have changed, but we'd be duplicating and remixing old ideas anyway.
I was going to say something to that effect, too, just to say, because I don't know if our description says anything about what we do. The projects that are remix projects, which is how we actually think of them, are often about bringing together two narratives. And thinking about interface in this context, it's about creating a couple of different interfaces for accessing the weaving of those projects, so that a third narrative would come together that would, we would create a third narrative that would take elements from the two narratives we were addressing, whether they're narratives that we create or narratives we're responding to that exists out there. So that creation of a third narrative, for example, doesn't depend on digital technology, even if we often address these things through a couple of different nodes. So we'll make internet games that are based on low-tech video games from the 80s, because that's one of the ways that we think through issues, or songs or things like that. So even if we're not taking from other sounds, the different modes of making a narrative or addressing a narrative or remixing other narratives are responding to this idea that Keith was talking about.
If we look at the traditional art, for example, there are many rules, many maybe practice. We have to also need a lot of discipline. And then if you follow all of them, at the end what you have is more than duplication. It sounds same. What you see is pretty much similar. However, for example, we can make copy for the sound file, maybe picture, and then bring them together. You bring different kind of meaning. That's also a lot of creation to me. Depending on the context, anything can be very duplication, can be also very creative.
I'd like to follow up on some things that Keith and Mendi and Rene had said. And when you talk about within the culture, within African American culture, in terms of the whole history of remixing, I mean, remixing food that comes off the plate from the master in terms of chitlins and all the rest of this stuff, when you really think about the dynamic aspect of that being so much a part of the vibrancy of the culture, part of the DNA of the culture. And I wish James Boyle had been here, but I had a good conversation with him the other day about some of this in terms of the derivation of the open source movement and a lot of the key legal issues that developed around sampling, et cetera. And what was of concern to me, and he agreed, and he's teaching a course in the spring that's going to incorporate some of this, is that we really need to give a tribute to African American youth culture and hip hop culture in terms of what's going on with the whole issue of mashups and mesh and grids and all of these other things, because the intellectual capital that exists within the community is not recognized. What is recognized and promoted through the gatekeepers in the media is a sense of deviance in terms of the picture that it tries to, and the false picture that it tries to give of our community, of the music, and of what hip hop is, et cetera. And so I think it's really important in terms of how we even epistemologically look at what is one of the primary sources within the Black community of having actually spurred the movement forward of open sourcing, of interactive digital media, and all the rest of this stuff. So that's one of the challenges I'm raising in terms of all of us who are academics, is to articulate that in a way, because we need to present a picture that give something that's positive as opposed to the scapegoating that continually happens in terms of black folks being looked at as the cause for the social malaise and the cultural degeneracy in the country.
Are there any other interventions from the audience? You had a question? Here. And then we'll proceed on. Yeah, go ahead.
It was tied into the question of artists now working with these new digital tools. And I wondered, what I've found as an artist, and maybe it's more true in the visual side, is that I kind of miss the idea that I can't really master my tool if everything you do is based on some software program, and that program over the years radically changes. So everything I learned 20 years ago, very little of that is relevant today as each new iteration comes up. So unlike a wood carver or a painter who can spend years and years, or a piano player mastering this tool, and that tool has stayed the same. With digital technology, you feel like you never can master it. It's like you get to a mastery point and then it's all different.
Any responses from the panel?
I definitely,
Mendi?
I definitely identify with that issue, and I think for me the answer has been not to so much focus on mastering the new technology, but to focus on finding the things that I really like and being able to stick with it even if the industry wants new. I was like, well, I like hypertext. That's now old. You know?
Very old.
I'm still doing it.
Well, yeah, for us, I mean, I think that's part of why we've stuck to these really kind of seemingly old-fashioned, outdated modes. I mean, we're making these really sort of archaic-looking Flash online games and hypertext projects. Well, number one, because one reason people work with the same tools for so many years is because eventually, if you work with a hammer and chisel for 30 years, eventually you have an interesting and complex critical relationship to those tools, right? You can step back at a distance and really think about what it means to hold your chisel in a particular way. And so I think if you keep working with hypertext for 15 years, you have the same kind of relationship to the chisel, even though it's not dazzling anymore. People are no longer sort of distracted by the chisel itself, right? So hopefully they get drawn to the idea.
Goto?
In my personal case, for example, first of all, I belong to the UCAM in Paris. I've been living in Paris, and if you know that there's a program called Max MSP, and I've been using this program more than 20 years. Right now, I'm teaching. I'm temporarily visiting a professor at the Ohio University. I'm teaching the Max MSP, and I found myself that how much I don't know. In that, depend on how you use it, there are many things, and I learn myself that I've never mastered this program at the end. I have to commit myself. I have to say like this, but at the same time, there is no reason to master. Although it's very limited technique, I need what I want, and then within this limited knowledge, I really extended how express in artistic form. Maybe artist is, in a way, it's not something to master technique, but just within limited material, derive somewhere else. I think that's the answer.
I want to bring up one other thing about this. I mean, computer music composer Paul Lansky, who's at Princeton, one issue that he's talked about with computer music is that since the advent of computer music, there's no longer sort of this barrier between the composer's ideas and the listener's ears, and so that can be great. That can be fatiguing for the listener, right? You're listening directly to the composer's thoughts, so people have sort of lower tolerance for computer music. But what we find, like with these digital tools, is that we're speaking directly to our audience. So to some degree, we're not so much playing the instruments anymore as we're playing the audience directly. And so you find yourself trying to master your relationship to people rather than the tools, I think.
Well, I'd like to say something too, if I can. Being a visual artist, I really relate to Rebecca's question. I'm not sure where she is. I think she might have. But I'm really hopeful that she continues her research. I was fascinated to learn about all of the devices that she's thinking of in terms of, the physical body, again, becoming the interface and the instrument. And Rachel Brady, my wonderful colleague here, has brought in a number of people to the dive that have been developing software packages that enable you to work directly with paint in 3D in the dive without actually using any traditional material, so it's not messy. You don't have to clean up afterwards. But you're involving your body to almost the same extent as you would attacking a canvas with a brush. And since we are kind of in the infancy of this whole technical age here, I'm hoping that maybe in 20, 50 years, there will be some tool out there that we would be able to master and do some kind of yoga of painting. And there's, there's only so much that we can do with our physical bodies, right? So if we return to what our bodies can do, there will be a physical limit to the tools, and then we'll be able to master it like kung fu, things like that.
I'm wondering what would happen if we changed the conversation and used the term cultural production, which has been really emphasized in art history, in particular visual culture, which tries to think across sort of theory, history, production divides. And so what if we use the term cultural production, which puts all of us in tension with the varied other people, whether that's individuals on YouTube or whether it's the people who are producing the software. It suggests a culture of exchange. It suggests either engagement in certain kinds of common discourses or politics, or disengagement. And so I wonder if we move from the term artist and art to cultural production, what the sort of, particularly when digital is referenced, and where, Mendi and Key's site is, how do I find that site in many of the same ways that I might find, an advertisement site. Right. So I'm wondering what the particular risks and rewards are for people using the term artist in thinking about discourses about cultural production and the digital.
Yeah, I would say we've used that term, on and off with our work, but I think we've stuck to the term artist, because art people pay us, but also because we found that it's important to align ourselves with that specific intellectual history, and so as the world gets bigger and smaller at the same time, right? As we have access to all of this information and all these cultural products online, it's important for us to sort of identify sort of our intellectual ancestors. And so I think that's why we stuck to the term art.
I'd like to follow that up, actually, with one of the questions that proceeds right out of this discussion of cultural production. One of the terms, the vernacular terms of the HASTAC conference has been silo. And everyone's talked about silos. So a silo, of course, is a storage place for food for animals, and it can also be an underground shelter for launching missiles. So the questions I have that come out of that are, how have artists become silos of information to be harvested, and how is and what are the implications of art as a service industry? And I think art can turn more into a service industry if we think of it as cultural production, a silo for cultural production, which is not to say that we shouldn't use that word and it's not productive, and I really welcome that question. I think it's a key question. But coming out of that is the service industry. So I'd like to pass that on to you all.
I know in reference to the genre of music that I love, the art that I love, hip-hop. Hip-hop has always been like a silo of information, but it's always been coded. And I think that's what we're seeing in the media now, is that people are trying to break the code and they're not getting it yet. Hip-hop is a culture. You know what I mean? It's a culture, and it's appropriate that we're talking about cultural production, because that's exactly what rap music is. It's the production, the art, the artistic manifestation of a culture. So if you don't understand the culture, and you don't have a guide or you don't have an owner's manual to the culture, it's very difficult to decode what's being said in rap music. So when I look at rap music, when I think about rap music, you know, since its inception in 1973, which makes it certainly one of the youngest, you know, art forms out there, it's always been a political, social, economic, cultural commentary about what we're seeing in our society. So it's always a silo of information for the youth who are able to decipher the messages. Sometimes messages come in negative packages so that you get the positive point. Sometimes they come positive so that you can understand what we need to do about the negative. But it's always been a silo as far as hip hop is concerned, and you know, I think it's very appropriate that that it's that a silo is, you know, a place to, you know, store food and necessities and missiles, because it can really be, you know, with hip hop especially, it can really be both. And I think any art can both offend and enlighten. It just depends on your perspective and your relative thought process. So.
Culture is certainly dynamic, depending on the region, depending on period. The thing is always change. Even in one region, after 10 years, the thing can be completely different. Also depend on the who are involved and so on. Technology cannot decide culture, like also the technology itself also can decide any artistic form, but only human can decide. So for the culture also, technology can be part of this, but technology cannot decide the culture.
I think there's a couple things. One is, I think cultural production is a byproduct of the artistic practice. I don't think that an artist can also choose to be a cultural worker. But I would say that. Second thing is that I think that art as a service industry for the digital age, I think is actually I would actually flip it and say that the digital age is actually a service industry for artists, so that artists are the ones who perceive, who absorb, who alter, change, and then represent. As for silos, I think that for myself, my work is I'm always producing cultural. I produce work that I try to engage social issues and political issues and try to be engaged with the world around me. And so I really like this idea of the silo. I think it's a really nice metaphor.
I'm also thinking a lot about, you know, some of the discussions we've had earlier today about education, and I think I like to think about information. Okay, so I'd like to think about the kinds of information that we produce, kinds of experiences we produce. And because I'm both an artist and a teacher, I think I'd like to see that conversation come together more. I know that sometimes I make work about things that I can't address in a classroom because the work hasn't been made, you know, so I want to produce an experience that I haven't seen somewhere else for the same people maybe, you know. So when I think about cultural production or what kind of age or what kind of producer of information I am, I sometimes am responding to things that aren't working in another way for me. I don't know if this is answering the question that you asked or that you asked, but I feel like what came to mind for me was that, you know, a lot of times in the humanities, we think of having domains. So if I'm a literary critic, I'm supposed to work in a certain way. If I'm a historian, I'm supposed to work in another. If I'm an art historian, I'm supposed to work in another, you know. And as an artist, I feel sometimes I can address the archive in ways that I can't necessarily do if no one else has already done it as an artist. And so these are all connected for me.
Can I chime in? I agree with what Rene said and Suguru said. For me, I think the term an artist is a broader term than just the producer of culture. I think that, of course, for all of us, political, economic, and social aspects play into what we do, but I sure hope our art is bigger than just those concerns, right? and it's interesting to hear the discussions about collaboration and collaboration between artists and scientists or artists between themselves. But I think what we do sometimes as artists, even if we are working single-handedly, is a kind of collaboration with something. I don't know what it is, right? Call it inspiration or luck or the muse, whatever it might be. We are collaborating with something, and sometimes that collaboration is fruitful and leads to some amazing things that we know we really cannot do on our own. And sometimes, we feel like failures and really disconnected with something else. But I think that's how, for me, being an artist is different from being a producer of consumer culture or any kind of culture, or being the production and the artistic engagement for me are different. And I think while the artistic practice can be enriched by references to culture or being aware of the culture, it inherently is much bigger and probably more enduring than just the artifacts produced within a specific time period and culture.
Are you thinking about process versus what actually comes out of the process? I mean, I don't know.
Well, both. I mean, I think we discover as we go. I think the term production implies that you kind of know your tool set and you go kind of methodically about doing what you've set out to do. But a lot of times we don't even know the tools very well, or we might even not exactly know where we're going. We're sort of discovering things as we go, or maybe 20 years after the work is finished, we finally realize, oh, that's what I was doing. This is what I was trying to say, and now it's even more relevant than before.
I just think art is a really specific area of cultural production where certain specific things are fruitful, like failure can be productive, and that's not true. Let's say if you're working in really specific areas of design where you actually have to solve a problem rather than make a problem, right? So I just think there's something sacred about art as an area of cultural production for me.
There's a question here first, and then here. And then your second.
Well, I hope this isn't a little bit, these conversations get circuitous because, now I have a response to something a little ways back, so I'll see if I can connect it. I think it's interesting that the conversation started with a question that was sort of like, who gets to be an artist and who doesn't? And it's related to the technology because the technology is suggesting that we all have open access now. I suspect that a similar kind of debate was going on at one time, because at one time writing and reading were a technology, and maybe there was a debate going on at that point in time about who would have access to that technology, and maybe not everybody wanted everybody to read and write. So maybe we're noticing a similar phase with artwork production. And then I'm also an educator and an artist as well. So I'm also interested in the years that I've been teaching in the idea that not only is art what is produced, or is it not only what we communicate, means of expression or communication of culture, but also art is something that people do and they experience doing. And so one thing that I'm interested in about the tools of technology and the relationship to me as an artist and others as artists in various forms, movement, music, visual arts, is that a lot of people are now getting means to experience the creative way of thinking, and that's a development of our mental capacity. So we're all getting neurological experiences that are different through these tools than we're getting if we're only thinking in texts and relating to the world through thought in verbal terms. So I'm pro technology. Free the art. I want people to experience making art more than I care whether or not the art that's coming out of those people is good, because I think it's good for all of us if people are thinking in artistic ways, regardless of what they're going to do with their lives. Maybe the thinking in an artistic way helps scientists to discover what scientists want to discover.
I don't agree with that. Yeah, I mean, one thing that I was just saying is that for me, art is a really sacred thing, and it's not that I feel like, well, these people should be allowed to make art and other people should. I just think this is such a great responsibility. For instance, I work with sound a lot, and so one important thing if you're working with sound in a large space, like I do sound sometimes for plays, and if you're working with a really large sound system, and let's say you're a sound designer or a sound artist. This is strictly a technical example. You can hurt people permanently by an irresponsible use of sound. So in a situation like that, I don't want just anyone having, the ability to hurt me with their art.
Real quick. I totally agree. When I designed the course that I teach here at Duke in the music department, I was trying to figure out, okay, if I'm going to teach a hip-hop class, what is it that I can do to really help people appreciate what I do as an artist? And the technology is actually what allows me to take my students in the studio at the end of each semester, and they record a rap song. There is no greater appreciation for something than to try to do it yourself. Yeah. Okay, and the technology is really what allows us to do that at this point. It allows me to do that with my students, and they walk away with the music in their hands, and they can say, okay, they listen to theirs, and they may say, doesn't quite sound like the guys on the radio. Maybe it's not as easy as it looks, and maybe we really should leave it to the artist. So actually, when you give people an opportunity to try it, then sometimes it gives them a greater appreciation for the art that really comes from the people who are doing it for the correct motives, or even if you're not, you can find out whether or not you're really supposed to be an artist by having access to the technology. So I think it's good.
Just wanted to expound on something Jay Bully said, and also something Rene said, is that it's a tool, and I'm a hip-hop artist myself. And not to come off as an elitist, but I appreciate the term artist because it does require a certain level of talent. I can't draw, I'm not a visual artist, but I have an appreciation for visual art because I can't do it. And no matter how well I master Photoshop or Illustrator, I'm never going to be able to create a lot of the works of art that many digital artists can create. And so I think the only downside to what to the technology and the access to the technology is that it's created a proliferation of just ad hoc artists who just think, oh, I got an idea and I can put it down. And even though it does the expression and the freedom of that expression is good, sometimes when you have the proliferation of so many artists, it can get watered down. Eventually, the true artist can get lost in to be honest, in the mediocre work, or just the person who just felt like, oh, well, I can make a rap song now, and I'm going to go ahead and try to do it. And then the ones who actually have the talent to do it and do it well in a way that it's meant to be appreciated, it gets lost in that.
Okay, we have a lot of questions. Here's one. You want to wait? Okay, then there's one back here. I'm sorry, you're next. You're next.
Yeah, I don't want to go up the service industries road because that might take me into the creative industries drama in Britain, where really the whole host of artist production is being made subservient to strictly commercial cultural production. So I won't go there. We have our problems, you have yours. The question I did want to ask is that there's a really fascinating discussion here which is very much focused on digital tools. I am very interested in things digital as a creative medium, and I'm wondering where the code artists are. And I'm talking about artists, I'm talking about people who actually use code creatively as a medium and who refuse the notion of digital tool. And I haven't heard any reference to this here, so I was just wondering whether it exists this side of the Atlantic. I'm sorry, I'm being provocative. Sorry, no.
Your question is...
Back there.
Your question is whether there's software art here? Is that
I want to bring us back.
Can we have a clarification on the last question?
Your question is whether there are people making software art here? Is that the question?
Yeah, people developing algorithms as a creative practice.
Right. Yes, they are.
We are too stupid for that.
Yes, Americans make software art. Yes.
So I think we've come full circle in an interesting way, and at the risk of irritating people, I want to bring it back to the question that the panel ducked in the first 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Because I think that the discourse that's come from the person in the corner and this gentleman here, I'm sorry I don't know names, has made a very important distinction, which is that participation in the productive process can be very individually satisfying, even if the result is not worth looking at. Right? So my mother-in-law takes a great deal of pleasure from painting when she's on holiday. And the results are competent but not worth looking at. I got a great deal of pleasure as a university student and post-university level at being a mediocre dancer in mediocre modern dance compositions produced by mediocre choreographers. And none of us thought that anybody in their right minds, except the choreographers, of course, because they had to think that, because they were trying to become good choreographers. So the only people they could get to work on were the bad dancers, because they weren't yet good choreographers, right? Nobody in their right minds would think that anybody should want to watch us, right? There's this famous phrase: "The best is the enemy of the good." It's not true. It's okay to be a crap modern dancer doing crap choreography if you get satisfaction out of it, as long as you don't pretend that people ought to pay money to see you.
Okay.
And it's just fine to put a lot of energy into artistic production if it satisfies you, but it may not be good art.
Lev?
I say the same is true for the academics. I mean, which is to say that art is a mode of knowledge. It's a mode of knowledge, but no one ever asks, academics why don't we celebrate bad historians? But that's not to say that it's not a mode of knowledge, and yes, and that we should experience that. Yes,
absolutely. I mean, John Brown pointed out that learning is one of the best forms of recreation.
Okay,
right?
Lev?
Very quickly, I think it's very interesting that this panel combines visual artists and music people, and I think this is two fundamentally different cultural fields today, because contemporary music is based on mass reproduction, and I think that if we talk about art versus cultural production, we have to look at the facts. And the main, I think, force which is driving contemporary art today is not technology, it's completely peripheral to it, it's globalization. Right? Every day a new modern museum opens. Never before so much money has been invested in contemporary art. As we speak, leading architects from Zaha Hadid to Frank Gehry, Jean Nouvel are building new museums of contemporary art in Dubai, right? And as Thomas Friedman said, since the 90s, 2.5 billion people have entered, right, with global world. So just as modern art, or the idea of romantic artists, right, emerged in the early 19th century as a way to legitimize the new bourgeoisie class, today we have a new global bourgeoisie class which wants to legitimize itself by investing in contemporary art. And it's a very interesting kind of industry because nobody cares what goes inside museums. The curators are happy, the artists are happy, the viewers have no idea anyway, but we buy the ticket. And and again, the contemporary art has never been doing better as a business. So actually, with globalization, so the way technology is affecting art is through globalization, and actually, the software turns out to be totally peripheral to it.
Well, I want to say something to that. By and large, I would agree, except for the fact that people care a great deal about what goes in museums, especially if it has to do with the body. So whatever bodies do, if their fluids are present, if they do anything with sex, everybody cares, and they care all over the world. So I think we have to be careful about about generalizing that too much. And then just to go back to Keith's point about loud sound and hurting people's ears and the responsibility of work, I mean, this is more complicated than just saying nobody cares. I know you know that.